Hi, it's Mr. Baumgarten here with a bit of a quick dive into how Java works with its arrays. So I have here a simple array of strings which I've called foods, and you can see I've populated some foods in here: avocado, bacon, cheese, donut and eggs. And I have here the Java for loop for iterating through an array. So we have here the array name, foods, and then we say the data type and assign a name to what we want for the singular item as we iterate through the array. So when the program starts, the first thing it's going to do is run this line that initializes our array, and so foods will end up with avocado, bacon, cheese, donut and eggs in it as our list of items. Food itself will not actually exist yet when we are just on this line of code here. So the next thing that will happen is Java will move on to the next line and it will start to execute the for loop. First thing it will do is look inside foods and take the first item from the array and then create a string and call it with the variable name food and put that first value into it. And so if we move on, food will then contain a string called avocado. And this string will exist for the life of the program running between the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace. So when we system out println food, it will print the word avocado. Java then hits the closing curly brace and comes back up to the for loop and looks inside the foods list for the next item. And so it was avocado, so it moves on to the next item and sees there's this other item called bacon, and it again creates a string called food and puts that second value into there. And again, that will exist for the life between the two curly braces. So we come in, print out food, and bacon will print. And so we move on and it gets the next value and puts cheese in there, hits the next value donut, hits the next value eggs. Then once we hit the curly brace at the end of eggs, it will still come up to the for loop and check to see what else is inside the array of foods. And it will realize that it has reached the end, at which point it will then skip these curly braces, it'll jump over them and ignore whatever was inside this code block and carry on with the rest of your program. And the variable called food as a string will no longer exist, and if you were to try to access it at that point, you would generate an error. So that's the quick and easy way to iterate through the values of an array. There is a second way of doing this within Java, and it comes in quite useful in a couple of different circumstances, which I will touch on in a few moments. So this second way of iterating through the array, it looks more complicated, and I guess it's because it is. There's actually three things that are happening here. So we start off, again, this line of code, we create the array called foods, and we set these 5 items into it, and so that will exist. But there's this new thing called I. And I is just a tradition. Programmers use the variable name I for short for iterator. Or index is for iterating through the loop. And you can see here there's the 2 semicolons in here. So this is actually 3 different things happening all at once inside this for loop. So when we first come into the for loop, Java will run the first bit here in front of the semicolon as if it is just a regular Java line of code. And so if this was normal line of code appearing outside of the for loop, right, this would be creating an integer, call the I, and assign it the beginning value of 0. And that's exactly what Java does. And this integer called I will exist for the life of the for loop, so from one curly brace until the closing curly brace of the for loop. The next thing that will happen is Java will then look at this second line here. And this is the equivalent to the inside of an if statement comparison check. The for loop will say if I is less than foods.length. So foods.length, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items in here. All right, so foods.length will say that there are 5 items. But when we use index locations start from the number 0. So this is index location 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but there are still 5 items. So provided this rule is true and 0 is less than 5, then Java will come into the curly braces and run this code block. So here there is a string variable being created called food, and we are retrieving the ith item from foods. So I is currently 0. So the item of 0 index inside the foods array is avocado, and so that value is being put into food, and so then when it does the system print out, it will print the word avocado. Java then hits the closing curly brace and comes back up to the for loop. Now it doesn't run this again because that only happens the very first time we start the for loop. What Java instead does is come over to this third parameter that we haven't looked at yet, I++, which is shortcut for basically saying whatever is inside I, add 1 to it. So I was 0, so this will execute as just a regular line of Java code. So this is now the number 1. Then Java will come back to the middle part and check to see if this rule is still true. 1 is less than 5, so now it will come and execute between the 2 code blocks. We'll hit this line here, creating a variable called food, which no longer existed because the first time we ran it, because variables only exist for the life between the curly braces in which they are declared. So the first time we ran the loop and it had the value avocado, once we hit the curly braces, avocado disappeared, or that string called food disappeared. So, but now we're coming back into it again. We're creating a string called food and assigning it the value from the array where index is 1. So food will contain bacon, 0, 1. And so then we can print food out, and then we hit the closing curly brace. We come back up, all right, and we add 1 to I again. All right, notice that food no longer exists. And now we check the rule again. 2 is less than 5, so we're going to come back into the loop and now execute, assign the value cheese into food, print that out, come back up, increase I by 1. 3 is less than 5, so we're going to come back into the for loop and put the value donut into food, print that out, come back up, increase I by 1. I is now 4. 4 is less than 5, so foods is going to put index location 4 into this string called food, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The value eggs will go into the variable called food, and we can print that out. And then this time when we come back up to the curly braces, so we hit the end of that, Java will still come up here and run this. So I will now become 5, and then it runs this check. Is 5 less than 5? No, it is not. So now Java knows to end the loop. We skip over this set of curly braces and then carry on with the rest of our code. Right. I will no longer exist because it only existed inside the life of this for loop. So I and food no longer exist. But the array does because it is declared inside this set of curly braces. So why would you use this kind of more complicated looking for loop instead of the other one? I'll briefly switch into a REPL and show you a couple of the advantages. So this is what happens here. We are printing out avocado, bacon, cheese, donut, and let me just switch this to the other for loop for a second. Right, so we're getting what we expect here. We get avocado, bacon, cheese, donut, eggs. Now what happens if there was some kind of calculation happening in here where we wanted to replace what was inside food? Maybe we decide that we're being a bit healthier, and instead of bacon we want bananas. So I'm going to put in here an if statement. If food dot equals bacon, so we're only going to swap it for bacon, then let's make food equal to bananas. All right, and we can print out food here to prove that this has happened. Let's just put in a comment. Food is now right. So now if I run this, it looks like, okay, avocado, bacon, food is now bananas, cheese, donut, eggs. Fair enough. It looks like it's worked. But if I run this loop a second time, just to see what is actually happening, and we don't need the if statement, we'll just print out the values of food. All right, so let's just checking everything. Everything helps if I can write. Okay. All right, so we're just going to run through and print everything out a second time, and let's see what happens. So avocado, bacon, food is now bananas, cheese, donut, eggs, and then when we run it a second time, look at this. Bacon did not change. And the reason bacon didn't change is because we updated food, but food was just a copy of one of the values inside foods. So our change to it didn't stick. If we use the other for loop, however, so let me just switch this now and make this int I is equal to 0, and while I is less than foods dot length, and we will increase I every time we come through the loop. Right, rather than, I mean, if I just create a variable here called food, we're going to have the same problem. Right, because we're basically saying, look whatever's inside this location of foods and make a copy of it and put it inside the string. Right, and so we will get the same problem where it hasn't changed the value. But now because we have an index number, right, this is like we're able to access the individual locations of the array itself, we can use that. Like we can print that directly. We don't need this temporary variable in the way. And we can also use it and access the value that's inside the array directly and update the array directly. And so now this time we will actually update that value. All right, so bacon was now set to bananas, and then when we actually go to just the normal print everything out, we can see here that this second one has been replaced from bacon to bananas. And so we actually got to change the specific value of the array itself. So that is one very handy way, one handy reason in which you would want to use this second way of iterating through the arrays. The other thing that's useful about this is you get the location numbers, right? So we get I as a value. We know what the different locations are. So we know that 0 is avocado, 1 is bacon, 2 is cheese, 3 is donut, 4 is eggs. Whereas the other way doesn't give us an index number. I mean, we could create one if we wanted to, right? Index is equal to 0, and then just do an index plus plus. But then at that, once we bother doing that, we might as well just have used the other for loop. I hope that has been a little helpful. This is Mr. Baumgarten signing out.